All right, you guys, super important topic when we're talking about leadership, and we'll tie it in more to leadership when we talk in person tomorrow. But for right now, we're going to kind of try to teach you a little bit about what empathy is, and also how it can relate to listening as well. A huge skill that great leaders have. All right. So I want you to try to think of a time when you felt prejudice aimed towards yourself or someone that you cared about, all right, and how that felt. It could have been in elementary school. Maybe you were a girl on the playground and the guys didn't pass you the ball or whatever the game was. Maybe at work, because of your age, you're not taken seriously. You watch customers maybe walk by and ask questions to people that are older because they just assume that you don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you were driving with somebody who got pulled over because of their skin color. All right, but think about those things and those different stereotypes that exist, and when you or someone that you care about has lived them. All right, and how that made you feel, and how it maybe possibly made them feel if you talked to them. If it wasn't you, if you had a chance to have a conversation with that person about their experience and what that felt like to be them. All right. And the first thing when we're talking about empathy is we need to distinguish how it's different than sympathy. And the Brene Brown video that you're supposed to watch does a great job of this. It's probably a 4-minute video. And it shows multiple examples of the difference between the two, all right? Overall, bottom line difference is that sympathy is basically you feel bad for someone because they're in a tough spot, right? Because they're experiencing something that's hard or difficult. And empathy is truly you thinking about what it must feel like or what it might feel like to be them, and literally trying to feel those emotions that they might be feeling. All right. And what's more difficult about empathy then is A, you have to be able to do that, and B, you have to be in touch with your own emotions. If you are someone who doesn't feel emotions, you try to squash all those things, you can't be empathetic. All right, you'll be sympathetic, perhaps, but not empathetic, because you have to truly be in touch with those emotions and try to feel them yourself as well from that person's perspective. In that Brene Brown video, she brings up a couple of really important messages here, in that when you are trying to be empathetic, starting with the phrase "at least" will automatically disqualify you from being empathetic, right? Maybe a good friend of yours is going through a breakup, and at least you were dating somebody, right? At least you had a boyfriend, or at least you had a girlfriend even break up with you, right? At least you were in a relationship, right? That is not empathetic, okay? And again, in that video, she goes through some examples of this, okay? And they're rather startling, but, sometimes people are trying to silver line the situation, right? Like, hey, let's focus on the positive things. Let's think about what good could come out of this situation. And there is certainly a time and a place for that, but if you're trying to be empathetic, that is not the time. All right. Empathy does not start with "at least." Okay. It just doesn't work that way. You can later on, when they're ready, maybe when they're more above the line, that's when a good time is to reflect and think about the lessons learned from that experience. But that's probably not what they need in that moment where they really need you to be empathetic, or where you're trying to be empathetic. Okay, as far as listening goes, and I mentioned as a leader, being a good listener is so important. I'm sure you can relate to every single one of these levels probably, right? Ignoring, you're not even pretending to listen to them, okay? You're not giving them any sort of acknowledgement. You're just straight up ignoring them, right? Headphones are on. I don't want to hear you. I don't want to talk. I don't want to listen, etc., etc. Pretend listening is where you're kind of nodding and but you're not really listening to them. If they were to ask you a question like, wait, what did I just say? You'd be like, huh? Wait, what? Right? Because you weren't actually listening at all. You were just kind of trying to pretend listen to pacify them. All right. Selective listening is when you're listening for something very specific, most often to support something that you are trying to prove. Okay, if you say something about someone, you're just waiting, right, for that moment where they do what you said they'd always do, or whatever it might be, so you can say, see, I told you they were like this, right? So selective listening, maybe you're trying to win an argument. Instead of just being curious or trying to understand their position, you're trying to be right. Selective listening is super common when somebody's trying to be right. They're just listening for very specific things, and then they're going to jump on those few things. Attentive listening is probably the most common. You're paying attention, right? Attentive, you're paying attention as far as you're hearing them. All right, but the difference between that empathetic, attentive, you are really thinking about what you're going to say. Okay, so again, it might be a situation where you're having a discussion and you want to kind of show that you're right, or that you're making a good point, or you're maybe not feeling heard, so you're trying to, prove a point or be dramatic about something to, to get a point across, or whatever it might be. So you're listening to certain things, selective listening, but you're also really focusing on how you're going to counter the things that you're going to point out. All right. And again, that's probably the most common. Empathetic listening is what you want to do. It's also the most difficult because you have to set all of your judgment, your thoughts, your analysis sort of aside and really try to just hear them and try to put yourself in their shoes and take everything in, which can be a lot. So sometimes you might have to stop them and then use some listening skills, communication skills of like, so what I'm hearing, or so what you're saying is, and just make sure that you're on track. And it's a really good idea to stop them when you're doing that, when you're clarifying things, so that it doesn't become attentive listening, you trying to think about like, oh, I've got a good idea for, I'm going to give you advice, or I've got an idea for helping you problem solve whatever issue it is that they're talking about. All right. So empathetic, again, you've got to be in touch with your emotions and be willing to feel those emotions when you're putting yourself in their shoes. All right, this is a really important video to watch. It's posted, so I'm not going to play it right now, but it really does speak to why it is so important to be empathetic and to try to be more empathetic. And I think that there'll be things that are said during this video that should hopefully tie in to your ideas of leadership and the type of leader that you want to be. Okay, so what gets in the way, right, of us being empathetic? A whole bunch of things, right? A whole bunch of things. Look at all these different pitfalls and traps. Number one, you might just not want to feel emotions because emotions are hard for you. Maybe you haven't had much practice. Maybe your parents have always told you to, suck it up. It's fine. You're fine, right? So you've never really been allowed to process emotions yourself, or been guided how to do that. So you might just shut things down or try to silver line things because you're not comfortable with what is probably seen as a difficult emotion for you because your lack of experience. All right. You're trying to kind of protect yourself because you don't want to feel bad because it's hard. Giving advice. All right. This is something for those of you, a lot of folks who want to become better leaders, want to help people, and you're constantly thinking, I know I'm guilty of this, constantly thinking of how can I help them? So when somebody's, venting or sharing a challenging situation that they're in, I'm many times guilty of thinking of like, okay, I just came up with like 3 or 4 ideas. I'm doing that attentive listening, right? Like, okay, I can't wait to share my ideas. I'm going to fix this for you. I'm going to make it better. That's a pitfall of being empathetic. Okay, for multiple reasons that we've already sort of discussed. Hopefully you can figure that out. Interpreting, evaluating, passing judgment, thinking like, that's not really that bad. Oh my God, you should have seen what I had to deal with yesterday or last week, or right? Like the at least things, right? At least your situation isn't as bad as mine or this person's or that person's. So those are some major, most common pitfalls. Also, we're going to talk about privilege, and the more privilege you have in different areas, the more difficult it is to be empathetic. You have to work harder than other folks to be empathetic because you are further away from that experience. So you have to do a little bit more work to try to truly put yourself in that person's shoes and really, understand or try to understand what's going on. Okay, this was pretty cool. So this was hopefully a video that you watched. I was lucky enough to watch this guy right here, this professor from Oxford, give a talk about empathy. And he said everybody is wired to be empathetic, right? Some people just don't develop it. But the good news is that if you're, listening to this and thinking like, yeah, I want to get better at this, you have everything you need. All right. You are in the driver's seat when it comes to this, and you can get better at it. But this idea, this museum deal, it was so cool when he was talking about it. And, how can I have said many times in class, oh, how cool would this be if we could have something like this? Imagine, your own life. Friends, peers that different struggles that they've gone through, if they could do something like this, right? If you could listen to somebody's story while walking in their shoes, and truly trying to get a better understanding of what it might be like, right? To be them, to go through this issue or that issue, and what it was like for them. You can't necessarily put that on or apply that to every situation that, if somebody goes through something similar, it's still their own unique experience, but you might come from a better place. You might understand some of the emotions and feelings that they might be feeling. All right. So watch that video. Really, really cool idea, and not difficult. This is where you guys, as young leaders, you don't need a PhD to have come up with this idea, right? You guys can be solving some of these problems and helping us, everyone, humans in general, get better at these things if you just use some common sense and just think, right? Just think, be creative, and you guys could come up with some of these ideas. All right, so the 4 elements of empathy, they've kind of been discussed in some of the links and stuff, but not judging and appreciating people as human, and that their experience is their experience, and not thinking that it's more or less, or that they should or shouldn't be experiencing certain things. Trying to truly see their world and understand those feelings, understanding emotions in general, just emotional IQ in general, and then being able to communicate that you understand that, all right, through questions, through saying, Brene Brown says, just say, tell me more. Man, that sounds really tough. Say more about that. Tell me more about that, right? That right there is able to, you're communicating understanding, right? Like, wow, it sounds like it's a really tough situation. Man, I think you must be exhausted. Right? Like, tell me more about that. Tell me more what you're doing. How are you dealing with everything? How are you dealing with just getting through the day, right? Anything like that is you being able to communicate a certain level of understanding. Okay. So hopefully by this point, you're starting to think of, how can I get better at this? How can I develop my empathy skills? All right. And there's a New York Times article that's going to go pretty in depth on a lot of these things and even give you a couple more ideas. So please do at least skim it, if nothing else. And maybe you're drawn to certain ideas that are on here. All right. But talking to new people, talk to people that, live in different places, different ages, different races, different experiences. That is a great way to increase your empathy skills. Reading books has been proven as one of the best ways, all right? And that professor who did the museum, the Empathy Museum, said that traveling is one of the number one best ways because it sets you up to talk to new people and different people. But he said, hey, not everybody has the privilege of traveling, right? Not everyone has the resources to travel all around the world, but, anyone can get books at a library, etc. And it has been shown to be almost as good, all right, as actually being there and talking to people with different experiences. So that is something that I can't stress enough. Trying out someone else's life. All right, so let's look forward to Patricia Moore. You watched this video, hopefully. Talk about someone physically trying out someone else's different life, right? Like, taping up her hands so she couldn't open things, okay? Putting things on her glasses so she couldn't see, earplugs in so she couldn't hear, like literally trying to physically figure out what life might be like for people that are older or have some sort of physical disability or challenge, okay? And then taking what she learned and turning it into design, right? Industrial design. So, OXO, right, that brand, I probably guarantee you probably have something, a potato peeler or scissors, I don't know, something of theirs. Target carries them. You probably have something of theirs in your kitchen, and she's the one who designed all that. And the story that she was the only female designer, and that they were designing a refrigerator, and they were talking about, like the handle and stuff. And she said, well, what about people who have arthritis? And literally all the other designers said, well, we don't make refrigerators for them. We don't design for them, right? And then that word, when you hear that word, them, okay, that should be a red flag to you that there's bias and privilege happening around you. All right, when you talk about those people or them, that should alert you to some bias and some privilege in the room of the folks that are talking. But she pushed forward and convinced them to try to, to start designing for people that looked different, that had a different experience than the 10 folks in the room or whatever it was, and became just one of the most famous industrial designers of our time because of it. All right, so watch that video. It's worthwhile. It's a true story, and somebody who has taken that knowledge and that skill of empathy and just the way that it affected her career and her profession is just profound. This video, also very worthwhile watching. Hopefully you watched it, but when we go back to talking to new people, learn to listen and listen to learn, and be open to changing your mind, I think those three are key for that video of when the high school students were talking to local police officers and breaking down walls and stereotypes and seeing someone as another human being, right? Like that's part of empathy as well. So I think that video is great to sort of demonstrate those ways of getting better at empathy. All right, so I think we're pretty good. Let's wrap this up and just understanding that it takes all of us. All of us can be empathetic. We have to put in the work and the effort to do so. And I think there are some people that if you look up the term empath, they're people that feel so much and take on so much pain and struggle of other people that they also need to know how to put up boundaries and how to re-energize. Okay, because it can be debilitating at times for folks. And so also understanding that end of the spectrum as well, I want to just point that out, and it is something to think about. And if you associate with that at all, you should look it up and do a little homework of your own on that and figure out some ways to help, protect yourself as well, while still being extremely empathetic, understanding that you also have to take care of yourself. All right, so this will all lead into a discussion on privilege, and that's where we will head next. All right, so thank you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.